The general's voice still echoes in my head. Whoever wrote this, see me after. My throat went dry. Every Marine in that formation stood like stone rain dripping off helmets, boots, sinking in Carolina mud. And there, I was heart-pounding pulse in my ears, the one who'd written it. The anonymous letter. The one that changed everything. That was the moment I learned courage doesn't always roar. 2 months earlier, Camp Lejeune felt like it always did in early winter, gray skies, diesel fumes, and the constant hum of routine. I was Staff Sergeant Claire Monroe, U.S. Marine Corps Logistics Division. 12 years of service. No reprimands, no medals worth framing, just steady work, good reports, and the belief that order meant safety. Then I saw him, Private Evan Roth, barely 19, the kind of kid who still said yes ma'am like he meant it. His bunk was near mine in the barracks, and every night I'd hear the same thing, laughter, muffled shouts, thuds against metal lockers. Then silence. At first I told myself it wasn't my business. Recruits learn discipline. Tough love builds Marines. But the bruises on his wrists, the tremor in his voice when he said I slipped during PT, those weren't training. That was cruelty dressed as tradition. One night around 2300 hours, I passed the showers and saw it 2 corporals cornering him, spraying him with cold water while mocking his accent. "Sing for us, choir boy," one sneered. I froze. I outranked them, but walking in would have sparked a riot. So I kept walking, straight to my quarters. But I couldn't sleep, not after that. The next morning I stared at the Marine Corps Code of Conduct pinned above my desk. I will never forget that I am a Marine responsible for my actions and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. That line used to sound like background noise, now it sounded like judgment. By midnight I made my choice. I grabbed a blank page, wrote every detail I'd seen, dates, names, incidents. I didn't hold back. To whom it may concern. There's a recruit in Bravo Barracks being targeted nightly. The abuse violates every standard we're sworn to uphold. If no one speaks, someone's going to get hurt. Please act before it's too late. I didn't sign it, just folded it clean, slid it under the door of the duty officer's office, and walked away. When I lay down that night, I felt something I hadn't in years, fear. Not of the enemy, not of the dark fear of my own conscience. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. The air in the barracks changed. The laughter stopped. Whispers replaced it. Someone had ratted. Someone had written a letter. At morning, chow heads turned when I walked by. No one said a word, but I could feel its suspicion, invisible and heavy. 2 corporals were pulled into questioning. They returned red-eyed and silent. Later that week, the senior drill instructor announced that hazing allegations were under review. His tone said it all disgust at whoever had broken the silence, not at what caused it. That night, Evan approached me quietly by the vending machine. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, whoever tried to help, "tell them thank you." I wanted to tell him it was me. Instead I said, "Keep your head up, Private. Things will get better." He smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." But they didn't. A week later, during weapons maintenance, I overheard 2 NCOs whispering. "They'll find out who wrote it," one said. "Doesn't matter," the other grunted. "Whoever it was, career's done." I kept my hands steady, cleaning my rifle heart, thudding behind every word. By the end of the month, it all boiled over. We were ordered to assemble on the parade ground, full dress, no explanation. Rain fell sideways. The air crackled with tension. Then a convoy rolled in. Black sedan, silver insignia, a major general's vehicle. He stepped out, tall, composed eyes like polished steel. No umbrella, just authority in motion. The general took the podium, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and began to read. My letter, every line, every sentence. He didn't name names, but each word landed like a hammer. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain seemed to pause. When he finished, he scanned the formation, his gaze slow and deliberate. "Whoever wrote this," he said evenly, "see me after." My pulse spiked. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breath. He folded the paper, tucked it into his jacket, and walked off the field. As the unit dismissed, I stood frozen, boots sinking in the mud. Every instinct screamed, "Stay quiet." But another voice, the same one that made me write the letter, whispered, "Stand up." I turned toward headquarters. Every step felt heavier. When I reached the door, I paused. The hallway was silent, lit by a single flickering bulb. My reflection in the glass looked older, harder. I knocked once. "Enter," came the general's voice. I stepped inside, saluted, and met his eyes. On his desk sat a framed photo, the same recruit I'd tried to protect. My breath caught in my throat. I walked in and froze. The moment I saw that photo, I forgot how to breathe. Private Evan Roth, his face younger and unguarded, smiled beside a man in uniform, the same man now sitting before me. The general's tone was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Close the door, Staff Sergeant." I obeyed. The sound of it clicking shut felt final. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." My boots felt like they weighed 100 pounds. I sat stiffly back, straight hands locked on my knees. He studied me for a long moment. The ticking wall clock grew louder with every second. "You wrote the letter. It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir." "Why?" The truth trembled at the back of my throat, but I forced it out. "Because someone had to, sir. What was happening to that recruit, it wasn't discipline. It was cruelty." His gaze didn't waver. "You're aware that submitting anonymous reports through unofficial channels violates Standing Order 14C. "Yes, sir." "Then why not go through your chain of command?" I hesitated, because, sir, the chain was the problem. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd gone too far. But instead of anger, a flicker of something else crossed his face, understanding, maybe even pain. He leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. "My son didn't tell me your name," he said. My head jerked up. Your son, sir." He nodded. "Private Evan Roth. He was placed in your unit as part of an internal morale assessment. None of the officers were informed. The results were revealing." I blinked. "Sir, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," he interrupted quietly. "That's the point." He picked up my letter again, reading a line aloud. "If no one speaks, someone's going to get hurt." His voice softened. "You were right." Relief and confusion tangled inside me. "Sir, am I?" In trouble, he gave a faint, almost tired smile. "That depends on what kind of trouble you believe in." By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire through the base. Everyone knew the general had summoned me. No one knew why. When I entered the chow hall, conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes followed me like searchlights. I kept my head down tray, trembling slightly in my hands. Corporal Miller, one of the ones I'd written about, muttered to his buddy, "Guess snitches get promoted now." I set my tray down beside them. Guess Marines forgot what honor looks like. The silence that followed was thick as oil. I ate quietly, but inside the tension buzzed. The investigation had shifted everything. People didn't laugh anymore. They watched each other. The camaraderie that once filled the barracks had been replaced by suspicion. Evan kept mostly to himself. When our eyes met across the motor pool, he'd nod once, a quiet thank you he couldn't say out loud. Still, my gut twisted every time I passed the notice board. No orders, no reassignment, just waiting for whatever came next. A week later, during a logistics drill, Master Sergeant Vance cornered me in the supply bay. His voice dropped low, the kind that carried warning more than words. "General's got his eye on you, Monroe. That's not a blessing. That's a target." "With respect, sir, I just did what was right." He scoffed. "You did what was emotional, and emotion gets Marines killed." He walked off, leaving the scent of motor oil and contempt in his wake. I stood there, hands shaking, pretending to recheck the cargo manifest just so no one would see. That night, thunder rolled over Camp Lejeune again. I couldn't sleep. The letter, the investigation, the glares it all spun in my mind like a carousel that wouldn't stop. I went outside. Rain misted across the asphalt, soft and cold. The base was quiet except for the distant hum of generators. Under the dim floodlights, I saw Evan sitting on the steps of the barracks, coat pulled tight, eyes distant. "Shouldn't you be asleep, Private?" I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them again." I sat beside him, the concrete damp beneath us. "They won't touch you now," I said. "The general's watching." "Doesn't make it easier," he murmured. "The silence feels worse than the shouting." I nodded. I understood that kind of silence, the kind that made you question if doing right was worth the noise it cost. Before I could reply, he looked at me, eyes glinting in the low light. "You think I'll ever fit in here, ma'am?" I thought about my 12 years in uniform, the bruises I'd hidden, the pride I'd swallowed, the orders I'd followed without question. "You don't have to fit in," I said quietly. You just have to stand." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. "Yes, ma'am." The following morning I was called to headquarters again. My stomach clenched. Not again. But instead of the general's office, I was sent to the assembly hall. When I stepped inside, every officer in Bravo Company was already seated. The general stood at the podium, the same letter in his hand. He spoke with measured calm. "Courage," he began, "isn't a medal, it's a mirror. And when an organization stops recognizing its reflection, it's already lost its honor." His eyes swept the room. A Marine in this very company reminded us of that. She acted not for glory but conscience. The air in the hall tightened. I knew everyone knew he meant me. He didn't name me, but it didn't matter. My peers turned. Some respectful, some resentful. When he finished, he left the letter folded on the podium and walked out. I stared at it, my handwriting, my secret now part of Marine history. That night, as I sat alone in my quarters, I realized something. I'd started a storm that couldn't be undone. And storms, once they start, don't ask who gets washed clean or who gets swept away. The morning after the assembly felt different. Too quiet, too careful. Marines spoke in clipped tones, eyes darting away the moment I walked into a room. It wasn't open hostility anymore. It was something colder. Isolation. That's how the Corps punishes without paperwork. Even the air in the barracks felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen to me next. At 0600, an aide delivered a sealed envelope to my rack. By order of Colonel Dunbar, report to command briefing at 0900 hours. I knew what that meant. By 0830, I was standing outside the conference room, uniform pressed, ribbons aligned, palms damp. Through the glass, I saw them, Colonel Dunbar, Master Sergeant Vance, 2 officers from legal, and the general himself. The same man who'd read my letter aloud to hundreds of Marines. When I walked in, Dunbar's tone was neutral, but his eyes weren't. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, have a seat." The general didn't look at me. He was reviewing a document, my personnel file, I assumed. Vance folded his arms. "We're here to discuss your involvement in the recent hazing inquiry." "Yes, sir." Dunbar's voice was clipped. "Your actions bypassed protocol, created internal disruption, and compromised chain of command discipline." "With respect, sir," I said quietly, "I followed the only chain that still worked my conscience." Vance's jaw tightened. "This isn't a debate, Sergeant." But before he could continue, the general spoke without looking up. "Colonel, may I—" Dunbar hesitated, then nodded. The general set his papers down and finally met my eyes. His gaze was steady, not kind, not harsh, just deeply human. "Sergeant, you broke a rule, but you also exposed a sickness. That's not something we ignore." Dunbar cleared his throat. "With all due respect, sir, we cannot reward insubordination." The general leaned back. "And yet when insubordination reveals a failure of leadership, perhaps we should reconsider who truly disobeyed their oath." The silence that followed could have cut steel. Vance's jaw twitched. Dunbar shifted uncomfortably, and I just sat there trying to steady the shake in my hands. The general finally spoke again. "You will not be charged, but you are reassigned to internal logistics until further notice. Desk duty, paperwork, the polite version of exile." "Yes, sir," I said softly. He gave a faint nod, dismissed. Back in the corridor, Miller was waiting, leaning against the wall, coffee in hand, smirk sharp enough to draw blood. Well, the hero returns." I ignored him, but he followed me down the hall. "Word is you got desked. Figures. Can't have the whistleblower near actual Marines, huh?" I stopped and turned slowly. "You know what the difference is between us, Miller?" He blinked, enlightened me. "When the storm hits, you'll look for orders. I'll already be moving." He scoffed, muttering something under his breath as I walked away. My new office sat behind the motor pool, 4 gray walls, a flickering light, and stacks of forms that hadn't been touched since Reagan. Chief Petty Officer Laram, a quiet woman with steel gray hair, handed me a clipboard without ceremony. "Inventory reports. Start with pallet rows 1 through 12, and Monroe—" "Yes, ma'am." Her voice softened. "You did the right thing. Don't let the noise make you doubt that." I nodded, grateful for the first kind word in weeks. Days turned into weeks. Routine replaced purpose. My hands, once calloused from convoys and field work, now smelled like printer ink. At night, I'd jog the base perimeter just to feel movement again. The Atlantic wind cut through my lungs sharp and honest. Sometimes I'd pass Evan near the mess hall. He'd salute quietly, eyes full of something like guilt. One night he stopped me. "Ma'am, my transfer came through, officer training." I smiled, tired but proud. "Good for you, Private." He hesitated. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. To you." "You didn't cause it," I said. "You just revealed what was already there." He looked down. "Still feels wrong." "Maybe it is," I said softly. "But sometimes wrong is how right begins." He blinked, nodding slowly. "Thank you, ma'am." When he walked away, I noticed a small tattoo just below his sleeve, an anchor wrapped in barbed wire. The kind Marines get after surviving something they don't talk about. A week later, I received another envelope. This one wasn't sealed. Mandatory presence, base-wide address, General Roth presiding. When I arrived at the assembly hall, every officer in Bravo Company stood in formation. The general took the stage, his voice steady as granite. "Integrity," he said, "isn't a decoration. It's a duty. And it's one this unit forgot." He spoke of leadership, of moral courage, of one Marine who'd risked her reputation for the sake of another. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. The entire hall turned to look. Miller's smirk vanished. Vance shifted uneasily. Even Colonel Dunbar looked smaller than usual. Then the general added, "We can't teach conscience, but we can remember what it looks like." Applause didn't erupt. Marines don't clap in formation. But the silence felt different this time. Respectful. When he stepped down, our eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod, the kind you earn, not ask for. Later that night, I returned to my desk. A single line scrawled on a yellow sticky note waited on my keyboard. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought without orders." No signature, no rank, but I recognized the handwriting. It was the general's. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that note until the fluorescent lights hummed out above me. Maybe this was my punishment, maybe it was my reward. But one thing was certain, the storm wasn't over. It had just changed direction. The next time I saw General Roth, it wasn't in a briefing room or on a parade ground. It was in the hallway outside the operations wing, quiet, unplanned, almost awkward. He was carrying a folder under one arm, dressed in khakis instead of full uniform. He looked more like a father than a general. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Sir," I straightened instantly. "At ease," he said, waving a hand. "You're not in trouble." That line had become my unofficial motto lately. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Walk with me." We moved through the corridor, past maps of deployment routes and framed photos of past commanders. Outside, the late afternoon sun glinted off hangar roofs. He stopped near the observation deck that overlooked the airstrip. "Do you know why I read your letter out loud that day?" he asked. "Sir, to make an example." "Yes," he said, "but not the way you think." He leaned on the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. "When my son enlisted, I told him the Corps would make him strong. What I didn't realize is that strength without empathy just makes bullies in uniform." I stayed silent. It wasn't a question that needed an answer. "I placed him at Lejeune under a different name," he continued. "No one knew, not even the colonel. He wanted to see what real life looked like for recruits. What he saw." The general shook his head. It nearly broke him. A gust of wind rattled the railing. I stared at the airfield, trying to process the weight of what he'd just said. "Sir," I began carefully, "if this was a morale experiment, why not intervene sooner?" He smiled faintly. "Because I didn't know there was anything to intervene in until your letter landed on my desk." My stomach tightened. So he really was. "Yes, my son." The silence between us stretched long. The distant thrum of engines filled it. He turned to me. "You understand, Staff Sergeant, you've done something few Marines ever do. Disobeyed orders. Proved they still mean something." That evening, I sat in my quarters, staring at the same page of my logbook for an hour, replaying his words. Somewhere in the barracks, music played low on a speaker, an old country song about home and rain and forgiveness. I could almost hear my father's voice. "The Corps teaches you to follow rules, Claire. Life teaches you when to bend them." A knock on my door broke the thought. "Enter," I called. Private Evan Roth stood there, crisp uniform duffel over his shoulder. His transfer orders were tucked under his arm. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Always." He stepped inside, hat in hand. My father told me what happened, about your letter, about everything. I stayed still, unsure how to respond. I owe you an apology, he said. You didn't just save me, you saved a lot of people from thinking silence was strength. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything, Private. You were brave to survive what you did. He smiled faintly. Brave, I was scared every night. That's what makes it count, I said softly. He looked down, fiddling with his hat. They're sending me to officer candidate school. I asked to go. That's a good move. I want to fix what I saw here, he said. Start from the bottom the right way. For a moment neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Then he added, If you ever wonder whether that letter mattered, ma'am, just know it did. When he left, I noticed something glinting on my desk. A coin. His father's challenge coin engraved with 4 silver stars. No note, no signature, just the weight of quiet recognition. The following morning, Captain Briggs called an all-officer briefing. The air inside the command hall was stiff with anticipation. He stood tall, voice brisk. Effective immediately, the hazing inquiry is closed. Corrective actions will be handled internally. Miller leaned toward me and muttered, Guess the brass decided to keep their dirty laundry folded. I ignored him, but the bitterness burned. The Corps didn't like public shame, it liked control. After the meeting, as we filed out, General Roth appeared at the doorway. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on me before he spoke. Before you all leave, he said, I'd like to make something clear. Everyone froze. There's been a lot of talk about protocol, about procedure, he continued, but not nearly enough about integrity. One of your own reminded us that discipline without conscience is just fear in uniform. That's not who we are. His eyes met mine again. That's not who we will be. No one dared to speak. Even Briggs's voice failed him for once. The general nodded once. Carry on. He walked out, leaving a silence thicker than any speech. That night, I found myself back at the observation deck. The runway lights stretched like a river of gold in the dark. I pulled the coin from my pocket, running my thumb over the engraved motto. Honor through conscience. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not triumph, not relief, just a small, quiet peace. A week later, I received a new assignment slip, temporary placement at the Base Operations Center. On the back, a handwritten line. Sometimes the chain of command starts with one link, Roth. I pinned it inside my locker right next to the code of conduct. Maybe for once the Corps was listening. It didn't take long for the smiles to fade. By the end of the week, my reassignment spread through the ranks like wildfire, and so did the whispers. She got lucky. She's the general's project now. Wonder what she traded for that coin. Rumors move faster than truth on a military base. At first, I tried to ignore them. But isolation hits harder when it's wrapped in politeness. Every Good Morning staff sergeant carried an echo trader. My new post was buried deep in the base logistics office, windowless, fluorescent, endless stacks of requisition forms that seemed to multiply overnight. Chief Petty Officer Laram had done her best to make the space livable, a pot of coffee, a radio tuned low to country classics, a faded photo of her dog taped to the file cabinet. She looked up as I entered. Morning, Claire. You good? Good enough, I said, setting down my bag. Don't let the noise get to you, she said. I've been in long enough to know this: the Corps eats its saints before it thanks them. Her words landed heavier than she knew. A few days later, I crossed paths with Master Sergeant Vance in the hallway. His tone was cordial, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Settling into your new post? Yes, sir. Good. Try to keep a low profile for a while. You've stirred enough waves. With respect, sir, waves don't stir themselves. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. That was the beginning of the quiet war. Not bullets, not shouts, just small, invisible punishments, ignored memos, delayed requests, subtle slights. They called it discipline. I called it vengeance, wrapped in decorum. Meanwhile, Private Evan Roth was gone. His transfer orders had gone through, and his name was removed from the roster. But his absence lingered, a ghost no one mentioned. Every now and then I'd catch someone whispering near the water cooler, "Guess the general's kid got special treatment. Figures. That's how you climb now, cry, and get rescued." I kept walking, head-high, eyes forward. Marines learn early that silence is armor. But at night the thoughts came back. Maybe I had broken something bigger than a rule. Maybe the system only works because people like me stay quiet. And yet, I'd do it again, every time. One Friday evening after filing the last batch of logistics reports, I lingered by the pier behind the warehouse. The wind was sharp, carrying salt and jet fuel. Chief Morales, an older mechanic from my convoy days, appeared beside me, cigarette glowing between his fingers. "Evening, Staff Sergeant." "Chief," I said, half smiling. He nodded toward the ocean. "Heard you shook the tree up top." "I didn't mean to." He chuckled. "Nobody ever does, but sometimes the branches need shaking." We stood in silence, the waves slapping against the hulls below. Finally, he said, "Back in '92, I reported a captain for skimming hazard pay. Lost a promotion over it. Took me years to understand the punishment was the proof I was right." I looked at him, the twilight catching the scars on his hands. Was it worth it? He took a long drag, exhaled slow. "Ask me when I meet St. Peter." By Monday, the invisible punishments turned visible. My access credentials to certain files were revoked. My reports were returned for revisions that didn't exist. A request for resupply approval vanished entirely. Chief Laram frowned when I told her, "That's not oversight, that's sabotage." I shrugged. "I'll redo the forms." She leaned forward. "Claire, listen to me. The Corps doesn't hate mistakes, it hates mirrors. You held one up. Now everyone's seeing what they look like." Her words hit harder than any reprimand. A week later, I was summoned to a logistics inspection. I assumed it was standard procedure until I walked in and saw Colonel Dunbar himself at the table. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," he said smoothly, "you've been rather quiet lately." "Trying to do my job, sir." He smiled without warmth. "Good. Keep it that way." He slid a document across the table, a formal review of my conduct and attitude. "Is this disciplinary action, sir?" "Not yet," he said. "Think of it as a reminder." He didn't need to say of what. I signed it. Marines don't flinch on paper. That night, I sat alone in the dark office, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. My hands trembled just slightly as I reread the review. Failure to maintain decorum, it said. Potential morale disruption. Morale disruption. They'd rather bury the disease than thank the cure. I laughed soft bitter and whispered to no one, "You can't court-martial a conscience." 2 days later, a sealed envelope appeared on my desk. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. No return address. Inside was a single line. "Keep your compass true. The storm's not done, it's just changing hands." No signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Admiral Roth. I folded the note carefully, slipped it into my breast pocket, and looked out the office window. The rain had started again, soft, persistent, unending. The Corps could strip my duties, bury my file, erase my commendations. But it couldn't erase the one thing that still mattered. I'd done the right thing even when it cost everything. And maybe that was its own kind of revenge. When the message came through the internal comms channel, base inspection scheduled, "Admiral Roth present." The entire installation went silent. Inspections weren't rare, but this one was. Admirals didn't come down to logistics outposts unless something was burning or about to. By 0900, the courtyard gleamed. Trucks lined up with parade precision boots shined brass polished to mirrors. Even the gulls circling over the water seemed to sense it. Captain Briggs was pacing the concrete like a man auditioning for a medal. His voice snapped across the lot. "Eyes forward, Marines. We're not just showing off our paperwork, we're showing off our discipline." I bit back a laugh. The same man who'd looked through me for weeks now barked orders like a patriot in a recruitment ad. Chief Morales passed by with his sleeves rolled up, muttering, "You can polish a wrench all day, doesn't mean the engine runs right." The Admiral arrived precisely at 0900. No fanfare, no entourage. Just quiet authority and 4 silver stars. He greeted Briggs with a handshake that looked more like a test of character than a welcome. "Captain." "Sir, we're honored to—" "I'm sure you are," the Admiral said, eyes scanning the courtyard. "Let's begin." He didn't ask for charts or numbers. He asked for people names, roles, duties. Then he asked for morale reports. That last word, morale, landed like a hammer. Briggs stiffened. "Morale is satisfactory, Admiral." "Satisfactory," the Admiral repeated. Interesting choice of word. "Because the reports I've read suggest something else entirely." I kept my eyes fixed ahead, heart pounding. He turned, slightly voice-carrying, across the formation. A Marine unit's strength isn't in obedience. It's in trust, and trust doesn't survive when silence is rewarded more than truth. Briggs swallowed hard, realizing too late what direction this was going. By noon, we were assembled in the main briefing room. Senior officers lined one side of the table. The Admiral sat at the other. The air smelled of sweat and fear. He opened a folder, my folder. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," he said, eyes lifting to meet mine. "Sir, you disobeyed a direct standing order during active duty. You bypassed the chain of command. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," I said clearly. "Why?" "Because, sir," I said, keeping my tone steady, someone was being hurt, and the chain of command was the problem. The Admiral's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Captain Briggs, do you concur that her actions constituted a violation of order?" Briggs straightened. "Yes, sir. The infraction was clear-cut. She jeopardized discipline and compromised logistics protocol." "Was any classified cargo lost?" "No, sir." "Was anyone injured?" "No, sir." "Was the mission completed on schedule?" "Yes, sir." The Admiral closed the folder softly. "Then the only thing jeopardized here, Captain, was pride." Murmurs rippled through the room before Briggs snapped, "With respect, sir." "No," the Admiral said sharply. "With respect, Captain, you've confused obedience with leadership. They are not the same." He rose slowly, the air shifting with him. "I've seen entire commands fall apart because officers forgot that rules exist to protect people, not themselves." He turned to me. "You made a hard call, Staff Sergeant, but the right one." My throat tightened. "Sir, I only did what?" "What a Marine should do," he interrupted. "Remember that." The room stayed silent long after he left. Briggs's face drained of color. The other officers stared at the table, avoiding my eyes. When the meeting finally broke, Chief Morales caught up with me in the corridor. "Well," he said quietly, "I think someone just found his conscience." I managed a weak smile. "Think it'll last?" He shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not, but at least he said it out loud." That evening, as the sun burned low over the pier, I stood alone by the water. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, the scent of service. For weeks I'd been buried under whispers, paper, and punishment. Now for the first time I felt weight lifting. Still a strange quiet settled over me, not triumph, not relief, something closer to clarity. The Corps had always preached that honor was about perfection, but maybe it was about something else entirely, the courage to stand when standing means standing alone. The next morning the rumor spread faster than the tide. Captain Briggs had been relieved of command pending reassignment. Some cheered under their breath, others just nodded. Me, I didn't celebrate. I walked to the parade ground, boots echoing in the dawn, and saluted the flag as it rose over the base. For once I wasn't saluting an institution. I was saluting the people who still remembered what it was meant to stand for. Honor doesn't roar, it doesn't demand. It just waits quietly for the truth to catch up. The day after Captain Briggs was relieved, the base felt different. Lighter somehow. The gossip stopped, the corridors grew quieter, and even the air seemed less heavy. For the first time in months, people were speaking to each other without watching who was listening. At sunrise, Chief Morales caught up to me outside the hangar. He held 2 coffees and that same easy grin he always wore before saying something that would stick in your head for a week. "Big day, Commander." "Staff Sergeant," I corrected automatically. He shook his head. "Not anymore." Before I could answer, a runner arrived from command. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, report to Briefing Room 1, immediately." My stomach tightened, again. Inside the room was smaller than usual, sunlight slanting through blinds onto polished wood. At the head of the table sat Admiral Roth, reading from a folder. "Take a seat," he said without looking up. I sat. He closed the folder, folded his hands, and said simply, "You've been promoted. Effective immediately, you're Gunnery Sergeant Monroe and acting head of the Integrity Program." For a moment I didn't move, didn't even breathe. "Sir, You earned it," he said firmly, "and the Corps needs you where it matters." He slid a second folder across the table. "This is our new initiative, Mentorship, Anti-Hazing Moral Conduct. You'll shape it. I want your fingerprints all over it." I stared at the words printed on the cover, Project Samaritan. "It's inspired by you," the Admiral said softly. "By what you did when no one else would." I blinked hard, throat tight. "Sir, I don't deserve." "That's exactly why you do," he interrupted. He stood offering his hand. I rose and shook it. His grip was strong, steady, the kind of handshake you remember when the noise fades. "Make it count, Monroe," he said. "And remember, rules guide us, but conscience saves us." That afternoon, the announcement hit base-wide communications. Captain Briggs reassigned, Monroe promoted, new training protocol in effect. By evening, the same people who'd whispered against me were now stopping me in the hall, shaking my hand, calling me ma'am. I didn't hold grudges. Revenge had already happened, the quiet kind, the one that doesn't gloat. Chief Morales showed up later with a mug of coffee. "See, told you saints get eaten first, then they write the rulebook." I laughed for the first time in months. Guess the Corps finally developed a taste for conscience. Weeks passed. Project Samaritan grew faster than anyone expected. Recruits began reporting small abuses before they became big ones. Senior officers who once mocked soft leadership were now quoting the new directive word for word. And then one morning a letter arrived. It was handwritten, neat, deliberate. The return address read, "Officer Candidate School, Quantico." "Ma'am, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I think of that night every time I face a hard decision. You didn't just help me, you reminded me what being a Marine means. My father says conscience without courage is wishful thinking. I learned that from you first. Second Lieutenant Evan Roth." I read it twice, then pinned it beside my desk right next to the Code of Conduct, the one that had started it all. A few months later, Admiral Roth returned to the base for a ceremony. No band, no cameras, just a hangar morning light and the smell of jet fuel. He pinned a silver oak leaf on my collar himself. "Gunnery Sergeant Monroe," he said, voice steady but warm. "Your record now reads Commendation for Judgment Under Crisis, for reminding the Corps that leadership isn't measured in obedience but in moral courage." Applause rippled softly through the hangar. When he leaned in, he whispered, "You didn't just change policy, you changed people." That evening, I stood alone by the pier, watching the sun set behind the ships. The wind off the Atlantic tugged at my uniform. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not pride, not triumph, just peace. I thought of the recruits still learning to march in line, the officers still learning what it means to lead, and that boy who once whispered, "Will I ever fit in?" I smiled to myself. "You don't have to fit in," I murmured. "You just have to stand." As the flag lowered and the loudspeaker called for evening colors, I saluted not for rank, not for recognition, but for everyone who ever stood alone in the storm and did the right thing anyway. Then I turned to leave, whispering under my breath, who was he? Really, a recruit, a reminder, a mirror. Because sometimes the people we save end up saving us back. For those listening, maybe you once wore the uniform, or maybe you've just faced your own kind of storm. Remember this. Doing right rarely feels easy when it matters most. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, share it. Someone out there might need the courage to pull over and help too.